Hi, I'm Zoe Taylor, and this is Money Crimes and Human Minds. Here we explore real fraud and scams, and importantly, the psychological tricks and emotional pressure that make ordinary people fall for them. Because understanding why and how they work is the first step to making sure that you and your loved ones are not the next victim. Today is something a bit different as we dive into a breaking news story coming out of the UK's social housing sector. Now, the Serious Fraud Office has launched a £300 million fraud and bribery investigation into Home REIT. Now, this was a company that promised investors tip-top ethical returns by housing vulnerable groups like rough sleepers and veterans. Now, 6 arrests have already been made, with searches all over the UK and even entering into Italy. Now, this isn't just a headline. It's millions of pounds. It's also promises to vulnerable people and a massive breach of trust. So here's the core of it. Home REIT was listed on the London Stock Exchange in 2020, and it raised over £850 million by selling investments tied to thousands of UK properties. Now, in 2020, investors were told that their money would go into buying and refurbishing homes for vulnerable tenants, and the rental income would help generate returns. However, only sort of 2 years later, in late 2022, there were serious concerns raised about property valuations and about the tenants' ability to pay rent to provide those returns. And ultimately, in early 2023, trading was totally suspended. Now, the Serious Fraud Office are investigating all kinds of charges of fraud and bribery, calling the company's collapse a devastating situation for both investors and tenants alike. Now, Emma Luxton from the SFO was quoted as saying that this company had a meteoric rise, spending millions on properties that were supposed to be housing the most vulnerable. Its chaotic downfall has left many with unanswered questions. Now, let's talk psychology for a moment, shall we? To try and answer the question of how and why could this happen, even to experienced investors. And I think it's fair to say, with things of this scale, social proof plays a big part. As humans, pack animals, we look to others to decide what's safe. And early investors saw others piling money in, and that made the opportunity feel very legit, very low risk. And of course, when everyone else is investing, our brains assume that things must be okay. Even warnings about property valuations and tenant rent didn't carry the same weight as seeing other investors commit millions to this investment. You could also consider the availability heuristic. Now, heuristics informally could be described as like a mental shortcut or a rule of thumb, something that helps people make decisions rather quickly, but sometimes at the expense of full accuracy or full logical process. Now, we all judge things by how likely things are to happen from what easily comes to mind. So you hear things like ethical, socially responsible investments being everywhere in the news. There's lots of success stories, lots of impact investing, people, doing good while making returns. It all sounds incredibly attractive and positive. And this can make the idea of fraud seem almost impossible. These investors simply weren't prepared to imagine a scenario where social housing company could mismanage hundreds of millions of pounds. Now, sadly, the fallout for this isn't just financial. Yes, sure, millions of pounds risked by investors. But more importantly, we've got vulnerable tenants who are counting on promised housing, and a wider knock-on effect of trust in ethical investing is going to be seriously shaken after this. Now, this sort of fraud isn't really just financial. It erodes confidence, it erodes hope and belief in big institutions. So there are some things we can learn, and it's about applying insights without being completely paranoid and skeptical about everything. But certainly where there is a trend, where there is a crowd, just because everybody's doing something doesn't mean it's safe. That age-old adage that I still say to my daughter now about if your friends jump off a cliff, would you? There is a famous phrase by Warren Buffett who basically says to be fearful when others are greedy and to be greedy when others are fearful. And that holds very true in a lot of these scenarios. We also need to challenge those availability heuristics. So these things that can blind us to risk. To pause, to research, to question assumptions, to not just believe what you're told, and to independently verify these claims. So check audits and tenant reports, check valuations, have evidence, make your decisions based on evidence rather than opinion. So in this case, it's a sad situation, leaving broken, vulnerable people in limbo and eroding trust. Now, this case is obviously ongoing. This is breaking news, so we don't quite know how it'll end or if indeed it is true. But it is a reminder that fraud can hide behind legitimacy, social proof, and the stories that we already believe. So stay vigilant, be balanced, and protect yourself without becoming cynical. For more fraud, scams, and human behaviour, please follow Money Crimes and Human Minds, either on YouTube as a series there or as a podcast on Amazon, Spotify, and Apple Music. Thank you.